He was the last black jockey to take the run for the roses, winning back-to-back editions in 1901 and 1902. He traveled the globe to ply his trade as he had to flee racism, revolution, and World War, saving many people and horses in the process. He rose to the highest levels of the sport in both Russia and France, but never really got the recognition he deserved at the time back here in the United States. Thorofan continues its Black History Month series as we look at the life and exploits of the jock they called Wink, Jimmy Winkfield. The youngest of 17, yes, 17 children, Winkfield was born in April of 1882 in Charlesburg, Kentucky. Horses were a part of his life from the start, as he was always helping out on the family farm doing chores, and was also responsible for overseeing the thoroughbred parades that would happen down the country roads. Following the death of his parents when they were still very young, Winkfield moved to live with his sister in Lexington and briefly took a job as a carriage driver before making his way to the racetrack, where he would be hired by Bub May. Under May, Winkfield progressed from stable hand to exercise rider and eventually jockey. All who saw him ride in those early years said he was just a natural from the start and needed absolutely no teaching. He then began his career as a jockey at Hawthorne Park in Chicago on August 10, 1898, aboard a horse named Jockey Joe. That ride probably could have gone better for him, as right after the start, he guided his charge right to the rail, cutting off 3 horses and causing a major spill in the process. The steward suspended him for a year for that ride. Imagine any jockey in today's world getting that much time for aggressive riding. And so his first ride turned out to be his last for quite a while. Wink never gave up though, learning from that experience and continuing to hone his riding ability till he was allowed to race again. It didn't take long after being reinstated for him to reach the winner's circle in September of 1899. During this period of racing history, it was very common for black jockeys to compete at the highest levels of the sport. In fact, 15 of the first 28 Kentucky Derbies that had been run were won by horses with black jockeys. So it was not hard for Winkfield to pick up a mount for the Run for the Roses. He finished third in his first Derby in 1900, but then captured the next 2 runnings aboard His Eminence in 1901 and Alan Adale in 1902. Both wins were in front-running style, but the latter was considered one of his best rides ever, nursing the unsound Alan Adale on the front end while floating his rivals to the deepest part of the track to just hang on by a nose for the win. He came 3/4 of a length short of being the only jockey ever to win 3 consecutive runnings of the Derby, when he likely moved just a touch too early on the favorite, ironically with the name Early, and could not hold off the charge of the winner in the stretch. Those early years of the 20th century were very good to Winkfield, as he won hundreds of races and was a much sought-after jockey for many of the top racing outfits. Things would change, though, for Wink in 1904. He had originally agreed to ride a horse for the top trainer in the country at the time, John Madden, in the Futurity Stakes. He later reneged on that commitment, though, and instead rode for a rival trainer in the same race. So enraged by this, Madden set out on a campaign to basically get Winkfield blacklisted from riding for any of the top trainers, or any trainer really. It worked, as Wink had trouble finding even the most low levels of rides after that. This was also a time when both racism was rising in the US and anti-gambling sentiment had also started to gain traction, causing the closure of some 250 racetracks across the country. Racing outfits in the US were now favoring white jockeys, and so Winkfield knew that if he wanted to continue riding successfully, he would have to make a move to where he was more desired. It just so happens that move took him halfway around the world. He received an offer to ride in Russia, being the first call jockey for Tsar Nicholas, as well as many of the wealthy oil barons and European noblemen, all of whom owned top racehorses and raced frequently at the tracks in Moscow and St. Petersburg. He won such prestigious races as the Moscow Derby, the Russian Derby, and the Emperor's Purse. His exploits earned him the nickname the Black Maestro, and found him traveling all over Europe to win top races in Germany, Poland, and France. He was named champion Russian jockey from 1906 to 1908. The changing climate of politics would again force a move, as Winkfield was forced to flee Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. After briefly settling in Odessa, he and the racing community again were forced to move as Lenin's reach took up more and more land. Winkfield helped lead over 250 horses and many in the racing community on an epic 1,000-mile, 3-month journey through the mountains from Odessa to Poland, where they were finally free of any Soviet control. After recovering from this trek, and with the help of some wealthy horse owners, Winkfield began riding again in France, and basically picked up right where he had left off, winning such races as the Grand Prix de Deauville and the Prix du Président de la République. Retiring from the saddle in 1930 with over 2,300 wins to his credit across multiple countries, Winkfield turned to training full-time and set up a stable at Maison Lafitte. World events would again disrupt his life and plans after Hitler seized control of much of France during World War II. Winkfield stables were actually commandeered by the Nazi regime and used to hold the horses of their own cavalry, but not before Winkfield could successfully move his horses to safety. He then fled back to New York to avoid the occupation. Unfortunately, the United States had pretty much forgotten him at this point, and after a brief stint working as a jackhammerman on work projects in New York City, he moved down to Aiken, South Carolina, working first as a groom, and then training again for the remainder of the war years and beyond. He moved back to France in 1953, and once again began building his stable back up, becoming one of the top trainers in France over the 1950s and 1960s. He always had an optimistic attitude about everything, and while upset his exploits had all been forgotten in America, enjoyed living a good life where he was respected and welcomed in France. Winkfield made one final journey over to the United States for the Kentucky Derby of 1961. He was also to be honored by Sports Illustrated for his Derby wins at a dinner at the Brown Hotel in Louisville. This was at the height of the Civil Rights era, and racial segregation was still very much alive and well. So much so that, despite the fact he was an honoree of the reception, Winkfield was denied entrance to the event via the front door because of his color, being told instead to use the servants' entrance in the back. Winkfield stood his ground, though, as he has always done, and eventually he was allowed in. Once inside, though, he faced even more isolation, as pretty much everyone at the reception ignored him. The only one to pay him any mind or respect was fellow jockey Roscoe Goose, who recognized Jimmy and sat with him at his table, the two swapping racing stories and then meeting up a few days later at the Derby itself, the last time Winkfield would see the Run for the Roses in person. Wink returned to France and his Maison Lafitte home, where he remained until his death at the age of 93 in 1974. Following his death, his family lobbied the industry hard for him to get the recognition in the United States that he so richly deserved, and had always received in other countries. All their hard work eventually paid off when Winkfield was inducted into the Racing Hall of Fame in 2004, the third black jockey to achieve this honor. He was also praised and recognized via a resolution passed in the U.S. House of Representatives in 2005, which stated in part, celebrates the remarkable life and accomplishments of one of the truly great American athletes, Jimmy Winkfield, who continuously overcame racism and other significant obstacles during his lifetime, and recognizes and celebrates the significant contributions and excellence of African American jockeys and trainers in the sport of horse racing and in the history of the Kentucky Derby. 2005 also saw the creation of the Jimmy Winkfield Stakes at Aqueduct that is run every year, usually in the month of February. They are all fitting tributes to a truly remarkable person who overcame so many obstacles and hardships to live a life few ever get the chance to. It was the life of a jockey whom his followers and fans in Russia most accurately recalled this way. The name Winkfield? That was like Shoemaker, Longden, and Arcaro, all rolled into one.